17 by the time she was 10, 24 by the time she was 12, the same age when each of those children vanished. But this is not just a story about what Virginia found. It's about what she never expected to find, and the secret that lingered long after the ledgers were closed. By 1851, when Virginia turned 17, she had carved 43 names into that beam. 43 children. They had arrived at Hartley Plantation as infants, lived and worked there. And then, the moment they reached 12 years old, they simply ceased to exist. No sale records, no bills of lading, no advertisements in the Richmond papers, no mention in her father's meticulous ledgers that documented every bushel of tobacco, every sack of grain, down to the last penny. They were just gone. But the most chilling fact, the one that would unravel everything, wasn't in the ledger. It was in the dates. Every single child disappeared on the night of a new moon. Virginia remembered the first time she noticed. She was 7 years old, playing near the kitchen gardens. There was a girl named Ruth, maybe 11, with quick hands and a quicker smile, who was teaching Virginia how to braid sweetgrass into patterns. Patterns that, Virginia would realize years later, resembled strange, intricate knots found in old nautical charts. They would meet in the early mornings when the dew still sat heavy on the tobacco leaves. One Tuesday morning in June, the morning after a moonless night, Virginia went to their spot. Ruth wasn't there. She waited. The sun climbed higher. The dew burned off. Still no Ruth. Virginia asked Ruth's mother, who turned away so quickly her skirt spun. A flash of something metallic. A small, tarnished locket. Catching the light before it was hidden in her fist, she asked the cook, who muttered, "That child's been sent on," and wouldn't meet her eyes, but Virginia saw it. The cook's hands were shaking, and a faint, peculiar smell clung to her apron. Not wood smoke or herbs, but something chemical and sharp like ammonia and burnt sugar. That evening at supper, she asked her father, "Father, where did Ruth go?" Thomas Hartley looked at his daughter, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. His eyes, for the briefest second, didn't look irritated. They looked calculating. Children should not interrupt. Ruth has been sold to a family in Tennessee. That is all you need to know. But Virginia had been in his study just the day before. She had seen the ledger open on his desk, the brown leather one he kept locked. She had seen Ruth's name in his precise script. And next to it, no entry in the sold to column. Just a single word, removed, and a tiny, almost invisible symbol drawn in the margin. A circle with a dot in the center, crossed by a single line. That night, under a waxing crescent moon, Virginia took her mother's sewing scissors and carved Ruth into the beam above her window. She didn't know why. She just knew that someone should remember. Over the next 10 years, Virginia carved 42 more names. She just knew that someone should remember. Over the next 10 years, Virginia carved 42 more names. And with each name, she noted the phase of the moon. All of them, new moons. 4 o'clock. Before we continue with the story of Virginia Hartley, a story that spirals far deeper than a simple black market trade, I need to ask you to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. What you're about to hear is a historical mystery that descends into something else. A truth that Virginia herself could only piece together decades later. Leave a comment below telling me what state you're listening from. The roots of this story are in Virginia, but its branches reached across America, and its shadows linger still. Now, let's return to Virginia in the summer of 1851, as she began to understand these disappearances were not random, but part of a meticulous, timed operation. The Hartley plantation sat in Tidewater, Virginia. Virginia's father, Thomas Hartley, was a man of obsessive order. He kept 3 sets of ledgers. The third, bound in brown leather and locked in his desk, recorded his human inventory. But Virginia, through her clandestine studies, began to see a code within the code. Next to the specially acquired children, always aged 3 to 5, always described as keen or of sound mind and body, there was sometimes a second symbol, a tiny stylized eye, and their removal date always corresponded to a new moon. These chosen children were indeed educated illegally by old Mrs. Porter. But Virginia, hiding in the schoolroom closet one afternoon, heard a lesson that froze her blood. It wasn't just reading and arithmetic. Mrs. Porter, her voice trembling, was teaching them to recognize complex constellations, to calculate tides, and to recite phrases in a guttural, unfamiliar language. "Repeat it," Mrs. Porter would sigh.
Per inom et salem.
"Through fire and salt." When Virginia confronted her father at breakfast, his answer was too quick. "An educated servant is worth more. That's simple economics." "But you don't sell them, father," she pressed. "Where do they go? And why do they learn other things?" This time, his reaction wasn't cold dismissal. It was a flicker of something like alarm swiftly masked. Fanciful nonsense. "Do not pry into matters you cannot comprehend, Virginia." But that night, she heard him arguing fiercely with her mother behind their locked bedroom door. One phrase slipped out, clear through the oak. "Too observant. Like her aunt." Her aunt, Eleanor. The family never spoke of her. She was said to have died of a fever years ago, but Virginia once found a faded miniature portrait hidden in the attic. Eleanor had Virginia's same intense, dark eyes, and around her neck in the portrait, she wore a locket identical to the one Ruth's mother had clutched. The pattern was a lock, and Virginia now had two strange keys: the new moon and her vanished aunt. On June 9, 1851, she followed her father. Her journey to the hidden building in the woods was the same. The conversation she overheard was the same. The thin man, the $800, Samuel being led to the wagon. But this time, as she hid, heart pounding, she saw something new. As the thin man counted the money, a paper fluttered from his coat pocket. It was a shipping manifest, not for a railroad or a coastal schooner, but for a vessel called the Caladrius, bound from Charleston to a port not listed, simply marked Point A. And beside the ship's name was that same symbol, the circle, dot, and line. The plot, it seemed, was a slave trading ring. But the evidence now pointed to something with a specific logistical destination. A point. When she returned home and checked her father's personal atlas later that week, she found a fold in the page near the South Carolina coast. A tiny, almost invisible X in pencil, right where the Atlantic met the Sea Islands. Not Charleston itself, but a remote, nameless inlet. Her alliance with Dinah, the enslaved mother, confirmed the horror but deepened the mystery. "They been doing this since the old master," Dinah whispered one night. "But it ain't just for money, Miss Virginia. My grandmammy said the old master, your great-granddaddy, made a promise, a covenant. He got this land, and his fortune got secured by folks far away in return for a service. Every new moon, a prepared child. She called it the tithe. She said it kept the land fertile and the family safe from storms." Dinah's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "She said they ain't just sold. They're delivered." The word hung in the air. Delivered. To whom? For what? Virginia's plan to expose her father to the Richmond Examiner proceeded. Editor Edmund Parker was both horrified and intrigued by her additional notes about the lunar pattern and the Caladrius. "This moves beyond criminal conspiracy into something that smells of ritual or obsession," he mused. "We must be even more careful." The September 12th operation was a success. The reporter documented the exchange. The story exploded on September 15, 1851. The trial was a sensation. Thomas Hartley was found guilty of illegal trading, fraud, and tax evasion. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The plantation was seized. Her mother disowned her. Virginia, the traitorous daughter, moved to Philadelphia to work with the Anti-Slavery Society. The official story ended there. Justice served. A chapter closed. But this is where the real mystery begins, and where Virginia's true investigation started. Because from her tiny room in Philadelphia, the pieces she couldn't fit together began to haunt her. She wrote her memoir, The 43 Names, but she published a second private manuscript, which she titled The Tithe and the Tide, Unanswered Questions. She dedicated her life not just to abolition, but to unraveling the secret of Point A. In the 1860s, using her contacts among sailors and port inspectors, she traced the Caladrius. It was a fast packet ship, owned by a shadowy consortium called the Ethelred Company. T made regular runs from the Carolina coast to the Caribbean, but its logs, where they existed, showed curious gaps. It would sail for Point A and return weeks later with holds full of a rare, specific type of phosphorus-rich guano, a fertilizer worth a fortune. But no commercial guano islands existed where its coordinates suggested. Then, in 1872, a freedman named Isaiah, who had worked in the Charleston Customs House, sought her out. He was old and afraid. He remembered the Caladrius. They never took on provisions for a long voyage, he said. Just water. And they took on special cargo. Not just children, ma'am. Crates. Always small crates, marked with that same circle and line symbol. Smelled like wet stone and copper. He also gave her a name, whispered by a drunken first mate, the Brethren of the Coastal Trust. Virginia's research into this Brethren led her to obscure maritime records and Masonic-adjacent secret society archives. She found references to a 17th-century group of plantation owners, ship captains, and alchemists who believed in balancing the ledgers of the New World. They believed the immense wealth extracted from the land and from enslaved people created a spiritual debt to the land itself. Their bizarre doctrine held that this debt could be serviced not with money, but with a specific kind of currency. Intelligent youth, educated in both classic and esoteric knowledge, offered at the time of the new moon, a symbol of renewal and void. Their goal was not mere perversion or profit, but a warped form of preservation. They believed this tithe ensured perpetual fertility for their lands, protection from hurricanes, and continuity for their bloodlines. The children weren't being sold to individual buyers. They were being delivered to a secretive collective entity, the Brethren, on a remote, privately held sea island. What happened there? Virginia's notes suggest her darkest fear, that the children were inducted into a lifelong, hidden servitude, maintaining the secret rituals and operations of the Brethren, perhaps even becoming its next generation of wardens. Their intelligence and education weren't for pleasure. They were a job requirement for a horrific, permanent station. The final, devastating twist came in 1889, 4 years before Virginia's death. A letter arrived, postmarked from New Orleans. The handwriting was shaky, ancient. It was from Mrs. Porter, the long-dead tutor, or so Virginia had thought. My dear Virginia, you do not know me, but I knew your Aunt Eleanor. She was not sickly. She was inquisitive like you. She discovered the pattern. She intended to expose it. She did not vanish. She was offered as the tithe in the year 1825. The family chose its own to fulfill the covenant when a suitable external asset could not be acquired. They told you she died to hide the shame and the truth. I taught her as I taught the others. I am old now, and the Brethren's eyes are elsewhere. I write this so you know you did not stop it. You only disrupted one node. The covenant continues elsewhere. The ledgers are never closed. Look to the Sugar Islands. Look to the new railroads in the West. You sought 43 names. Multiply that by 100, my child. Then you will begin to see. Virginia Hartley died in 1893, not at peace, but with a chilling understanding. Her father was not a singular monster. He was a quartermaster in a vast, hidden economy that traded in human lives for a warped notion of eternal security. The beam with the 43 names was a monument to one small chapter. The Brethren of the Coastal Trust and their tithe was the book, and the story's final, eerie postscript? In 1920, a historian cataloging the Hartley papers in Philadelphia found Virginia's private journal. Tucked in the back was a modern clipping from a 1919 Savannah newspaper. A small article about a body washed ashore on a remote Georgia island that an unidentified man, older, dressed in strange, anachronistic clothing. He carried no identification, only a small, tarnished silver locket. Inside the locket was not a picture, but a tiny, carefully folded slip of paper. On it, in minute-precise script, was a single word, removed, and the date of his discovery, the morning after a new moon. This story forces us to confront an uncomfortable duality. The documented horror of the antebellum slave trade is monstrous enough. But what if, in its shadows, festered even stranger, more ritualistic crimes. Crimes born from a fusion of extreme greed, twisted folklore, and a belief that power could be bought not just from men, but from the very land with a specific terrible coin. What do you think? Was Thomas Hartley part of a larger, secret society with a horrifying ritual purpose? Did the tithe continue after Virginia's exposure? Could elements of such beliefs have survived, transformed, in the darkest corners of American history? The comments section is yours. I read every theory. If you were drawn into these deep, historical labyrinths where the official record meets the unsettling whisper, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. We delve into the forgotten, the suppressed, and the terrifyingly plausible. Share this with someone who isn't afraid of history's hidden rooms. We remember the 43 names on Virginia's beam, but we must also wonder about the names of the ships, the names of the secret coves, and the name of the silent, waiting island known only as Point A. Some mysteries don't end. They just go dormant, waiting for the next new moon. Thank you for listening. Until next time.